Hello, my name is Dr. Aisha Bonner Cozad, and I'm an adjunct professor at Howard University.
I'm Sean Pears. I'm a lecturer in the English department at Howard University.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Working People, a podcast about the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of the working class today. Brought to you in partnership with In These Times magazine and the Real News Network, produced by Jules Taylor, and made possible by the support of listeners like you. So, hello everyone. We are momentarily interrupting our ongoing series that we're kicking off season 5 of the show with. As you guys know, we've been publishing a number of conversations that I got to have with educators and organizers, activists, and scholars in the state of Wisconsin this past summer. As part of this kind of special series to investigate, the struggle to rebuild worker power in the state of Wisconsin 10 years after the passing of Act 10 under Republican Governor Scott Walker, and nearly 50 years after the breaking of the infamous Hortonville teacher strike. So I hope that you guys have been enjoying that series. We have another great installment coming for y'all this week. But as you all know, when there is an urgent labor issue that we want to make sure our listeners know about, we use these Working People mini-casts to get the word out. And that's what we're doing today, because there is a very important struggle that you may or may not have heard about. But it's very important, and as y'all heard, we are very grateful to have Sean and Aisha here to help us understand the struggle that is happening at Howard University, where around 350 non-tenure-track and adjunct professors are set to go on strike this Wednesday, March 23rd, at the historic Howard University. So I'm going to turn things over to our guests in a sec to really sort of help us set the scene, but I wanted to read just a little bit from a great piece by Peter Lucas that was recently published in Jacobin magazine that, of course, we have linked to in the show notes, and I think it gives y'all a good sort of summation of why non-tenure track faculty and adjuncts are prepared to go on strike. And, what sort of larger injustices are wrapped up in this strike, because it really is sort of mind-blowing. And as Peter Lucas writes in Jacobin, quote, "After more than 3 years of negotiating their first contract since they unionize," parentheses, I'm just going to pause there and underline that. We're talking 3 years of negotiating a first contract since they unionized. Okay, back to Peter. 150 full-time lecturers are expected to strike at Howard University beginning this Wednesday. Unless an agreement is reached in the coming days, they will strike alongside almost 200 adjunct professors hoping to secure their second contract. Established not long after the end of the Civil War, Howard University is widely regarded as the nation's top historically black college or university, or HBCU. Its rich intellectual history attracts accomplished academics from around the world. Unfortunately, according to strike-ready faculty, Howard has a history of underpaying and arbitrarily terminating non-tenured professors, end quote. So that's what we're here to discuss. And there is a lot to discuss. So, with all that sort of framing in mind, Sean, Aisha, I again wanted to thank you both so much for taking time to chat to us, especially as you stand on the brink of a strike after 3 arduous long years of trying to secure a first contract that is for the lecturers. So I was wondering if we could start by, getting to know a bit more about you two and the work that you do there at Howard, and I guess your own experience leading up to this strike that may happen this week.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us on. So I'm not just an adjunct professor at Howard. I'm also an alumnus. I graduated from Howard with my master's and then went into the doctoral program. So, it was a great pleasure to be able to give a little bit back to the university that I feel gave so much to me. And in 2014, I started teaching as an adjunct and have continuously been reappointed since then to teach foundational courses for our first year students in my department. And it's great. It is a true pleasure to do this work. And when we unionized in 2017, I thought that was great too. I'm a generally optimistic person. And it wasn't until, fairly recently that I sort of clued in to what was really going on. I mean, everybody knows adjuncts don't get a lot of money. That's just the way it is. I mean, that's what I've always known about academia. Adjuncts don't get paid. They typically are doing it as part of a second or third or fourth or fifth, side hustle. That's just sort of known fact. And I think, whenever you have a situation where everyone sort of knows and nods their heads when you talk about a class of worker that's being exploited, and people are just sort of like, well, that's how it goes. Something is really, really wrong with that. And so when I saw that, there was a strike, I said, you know what? I need to be here for this. Not just as a person who deals with social justice as my part of my livelihood, but, just as a person who says I can bring something, right, to the table to make a difference. And so we've been in it. It feels like forever. I mean, it's really only gotten super intense since last week, but it has been a very intense ride. We're trying to reach out and spread the word so people know what's happening. Anytime people are treating you poorly, they would prefer to do that in the dark and not in the light. And I think it's pretty clear that the administration at Howard knows they're in the wrong on this.
And Sean, I want you to hop in here, but just to underscore one thing that you were just talking about it's not. I guess that's one thing that has changed since I got into academia a decade ago, right? As a graduate student, like it still felt new to me to learn about the horrific, injustice that is the adjunctification of the faculty, right? Working people listeners, we've talked about this plenty, right? In the past 30 to 40 years, the ratio of tenure-track to non-tenure-track faculty has completely flipped. It used to be like 75% of the teaching was done by tenure-track faculty at universities and colleges. Now, over 75% of that teaching load is done by non-tenure-track faculty, the majority of them adjuncts who are working on quarter by quarter or semester by semester contracts. So that was still a big shock to me. But to your point, Aisha, it's like the sad thing is that we've kind of gotten over the initial shock and we're just like, yep, that's kind of how it is now. I guess the one bright spot is like we can still be somewhat horrified. And I wanted to just mention, I would be remiss if we didn't mention this week's blow up, because back in my home state, I don't know what the hell they were thinking, but the University of California, Los Angeles really caught hell from a lot of people around the country after they posted a job posting for the chemistry and biochemistry department for an adjunct that specified that position would not be compensated at all. And everyone was like, so, like, you got to be fucking kidding me. Pardon my French. But like, apparently UCLA has now reversed course. But I guess just when you think there can be no more bottom, like they can still go lower. So Sean, sorry, I wanted to stress that before you hopped in.
No, I'm glad you brought it up. And I think this is the broader landscape in which we're fighting here and engaged in struggle, is that one in which kind of tenure has really been eroded by this, what you call the adjunctification, or the kind of a proletarianization of higher education. And this is part of the reason why it's one thing that they've repeatedly said, the administration, and they've said this to us at the table as well, at the bargaining table, is that we and our efforts are in some ways eroding tenure by making these jobs more stable, by making them better compensated. We're attacking tenure and we're destroying tenure, and it's just so backwards of the truth. It's just so diametrically opposed to what we're doing, and to a kind of broader understanding of the history, I think, of higher ed over the last couple of decades. So these conversations can get pretty crazy when you're talking to management, I guess. But just as far as my own what led me here, it's a very different story, I think. But when I was getting my PhD at University of Buffalo, I kind of in the back of my head thought that I wanted to come teach at Howard. I had friends who taught in the English department there. I had heard a lot about how curious and engaged the students are. I'd heard a lot about the academic freedom in the department. And I love DC, and it's where my wife lived. And so when there was a job posted, when I was finishing my PhD, I really jumped to it. But when I was being offered the job by the chair of my department, the chair had to apologize for the pay that they were offering and said, look, it's not negotiable. Our hands are tied on this, but I'm sorry. I know that this is too low. And that's just not a situation you want anyone to be in. It's not a situation that any department at Howard University should be in. It's not a position we should be putting, chairs and hiring committees in. And certainly, it's not a position that any of the faculty who are teaching for that pay should be in either. So I got involved with the union effort basically as soon as I joined the department. This was back in fall 2020. And they were already at that point 2 years into negotiation and had gotten nowhere. We can talk more about this, but I mean, they really had made no progress. So it has been incredibly inspiring just over the last couple of days since we called the strike to see how much movement there has been at the table. We're still in it. We're far from settlement, but it's been a long road, but we're here now.
Man, and we're walking our way up to the strike. And I want to talk a bit more about the negotiations, such that they are, and even a bit about that kind of initial unionization campaign to some degree. But I guess, like, just before we move on from there, just to kind of pick up on something you both were talking about, could you say a bit more about, I guess, just like what you and your colleagues are going through on a week-to-week basis? Again, for folks who maybe haven't been on a college campus for a while, or folks doing other types of jobs, I guess, could you just say a little more about the sort of working conditions for adjuncts and lecturers at Howard, the workloads, the lack of permanent contracts? I guess just I want to make sure that listeners kind of had the full context here.
Sure. So I can definitely speak to the adjunct piece. we have to reapply for our jobs every year, every school year. And it's never guaranteed. I mean, I feel like I have been in a very privileged class of adjuncts who have been able to do this work continuously, but that is not, I would say that is not the norm, to have such a long tenure of continuous reappointment. A lot of people are working semester to semester, or, school year to school year, as adjuncts without that, guarantee that they're going to be able to come back. And if you're relying on that paycheck to pay your rent, to get your prescriptions, to send your kid to camp, and you don't know, right? Like starting in May, you don't know if that paycheck is going to come around again in September or late August or whenever. That's tough. And I'm sure a lot of people can identify with having that sort of, insecurity in your finances. It is not a healthy way to live when you're always scrambling, to figure out where that next dollar is coming from. So, that's sort of the landscape. But additionally, adjuncts get no type of academic support, right? Like, we don't get TAs. We don't have graduate assistants. We don't have any of those things that, full-time tenure-track professors enjoy. And I get that universities have a limited resources. And we're not asking for that, right? Like that's not part of what we're asking for. We are only asking for equitable pay and a little bit of job security. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, our requests are rather modest. And it's hard to see, because I could tell you what I think would be a robust contract and all of the things that it would include. But we're not asking for that. We're asking for something that's fair. And it's hard to take that the fight has been 4 years for something so modest. It's just like anytime, if you're in the DC metro area, anytime they do construction on 95, by the time they've authorized the construction and they've pulled together the money and they actually start it, whatever plan they had to improve the density of the road is already 10 years behind what's actually needed. And that's kind of what this feels like. Even if we get to a decision today, even if we agree on something today, whatever that is still going to be below where we really should be. And yet we're still at the table.
Yeah, I can second that pretty strongly. And it's right. We're making up for lost ground here. I mean, and to the question, like, about what the reality is, just, I can speak to the full-time side of things. I mean, that's what's funny about it, is calling it full-time, because there's basically no one who can do only this job, because it just doesn't pay well enough. And so every single one of my colleagues are in one of two situations. One, they're being sort of partially subsidized by spouses or partners who earn more than they do, or they are working second or sometimes third or sometimes fourth jobs, in many cases, second full-time jobs. So this is, it's 2 full-time. And the administration is in fact aware of this, because one of the things that they started doing last year, I think this was the first year that they introduced it. It was my first year at Howard, but I think it was the first year they did this. The administration asked all of the faculty to fill out, all the full-time faculty to fill out a form basically saying the other places where they worked. And this just kind of highlights they're not even operating under a pretense that they're paying people enough to live in the market area. So it's that's a state of affairs, and as Aisha was saying, we're fighting. We're not going to win something that I think is going to fundamentally change that kind of dynamic, but it's going to at least be a step in the right direction.
Well, and there's something here that I want to be very gentle about how I approach this, right? Because there's a very low-key racist way that you can make this claim, right? Because it's something that I've talked about a lot from my own experience in academia, and it's something that comes up in a number of the academic interviews with academic workers that we've had on this show over the years, right? One of the primary ways, if not the primary way, that higher education is able to expand and exploit this mass underclass of worker is by offering, it's the allure of the job, right? It's the love of the work, right? It's the environment. You get so sucked into that ideal of teaching on a beautiful college campus and working with young, hungry students and brilliant colleagues and reading and researching and all that good stuff. But it's at some point you learn that that's supposed to be some form of non-monetary compensation to make up for the fact that you're getting paid like shit, to say nothing of all the other, ways that you're taking advantage of, or all the other resources that adjuncts and lecturers don't get, which y'all have mentioned in your past answers, right? So there are a lot of problems here, but still that sort of love of the type of work, or that ideal of academic work, keeps us going and keeps us dealing with so much crap that we probably otherwise wouldn't. And so that's everywhere, right? I want to make it very clear that this is a problem across the board in higher education, and hell, it's not even just in higher education. Just at the Real News Network this week, I published an interview with Karin, an educator in Minneapolis who's been on strike for 2 weeks. And K through 12 educators feel the same way, right? They're always told, oh, you need to just shut up and do your job because you're there to serve the kids, right? You're there to serve this noble mission, so it shouldn't matter as much that you're getting paid like crap and all that good stuff. But I've noticed, and especially when you have that additional investment in an institution like Howard, right? As we said up top, one of the most storied, higher education institutions in this country, right? One of the most storied HBCUs in this country. There's got to be just that. I mean, I have to imagine that also plays a factor, right? Just that disconnect between love for the institution. Aisha, you even said yourself, you wanted to give back to the institution that gave so much to you. And there is a really important mission that Howard embodies, but do you guys and your colleagues, I guess, just how do you grapple with that disconnect between serving that mission and the students and the broader campus community, while at the same time really being undervalued and not treated like you should be?
I think that is a really great question. 100% you're correct. Let me start by saying that. And I cannot tell you the number of times in the last week that we have had that very conversation amongst ourselves, or, in various forums. telling our stories to one another about why we came to Howard and why we feel this, it's more of a vocation, right? Like this desire to be, that adage, those who can't do teach, right? It's supposed to be a dig at teachers. I've thought this for a long time. People who say that have no idea of the power and the absolute joy there is in being at the beginning of somebody's journey, right? Like at the core of it, at the core of our humanity is a desire to pass on to others what we know, right? We, in a sense, right? You sometimes hear parents talking about like, the legacy of my children. Well, we are concerned about that in a lot of different ways. And as an educator, you have this unique opportunity to be a part of somebody else's story, to be a part of their legacy, even, in small ways and big ways, right? You get to help people build a foundation upon which they will rest the rest of their lives on. And there's so much privilege in that, right? Sometimes, old students will ping me on LinkedIn and I'm looking at the degrees behind their name, or, so-and-so opened, their own mental health center, or so-and-so is traveling to somewhere to speak at a conference. And I think, how amazing is that? Like, what a joy, what a pleasure. And on top of that, to do it at Howard, right? The history, the legacy, the mission, the values, providing safe space for Black and Brown youth around the globe, right? Because it's not just American. I mean, we truly have an international base. It is a privilege and a joy stacked upon more privilege and more joy. And what makes me furious is that the institution 100% knows this. It knows this, and it uses that as a reason to not pay us, because they know that the best and brightest are still going to come to Howard because of what Howard is and the students who come here. We so desperately want to be a part of it that, to our own detriment, we have ignored is probably a bad characterization. We have said this trade-off is something we're willing to accept. My best friend calls it comfortable consequences, right? Like, we understand that there's a consequence to this, low wage, but we feel that that our ability to benefit, intellectually and academically, and what we're able to give back to students, right? That there's value in that. But there comes a time when you have to say, there's something really wrong with this, right? Like there is a deep injustice here that must be righted. And we happen to be here at that moment in time.
I don't have a lot to add to that. All I would say is that that there is something that teaching at Howard really is different than teaching at other universities. In my own experience, I've taught at a number of universities, smaller private ones and larger public ones, and the level of engagement, the level of curiosity, the kind of belief in something greater than themselves, the kind of pursuit of trying to understand a tradition and trying to understand a legacy, is fundamentally different at Howard, and it makes a classroom a different type of space, and it makes teaching a different kind of joy. But to exploit that or to use that as an excuse to pay people less, I mean, is really a real shame. And the other thing I would say to that point is, like, I know a lot of my colleagues who, for various reasons, they could go get a job at a PWI, at another university or college in DC or in another market. They have the credentials, they have the qualifications. They want to teach at Howard because at Howard they can participate in that, and at Howard they can be, in a sense, like their whole selves, and they don't have to hold any parts of themselves back. They don't have to confront certain forms of a lack of understanding, or deal with kind of colleagues in a certain type of way. They can just be there and kind of and do their work and express themselves in a kind of full and human way. And again, that is a beautiful thing. That's a thing worth truly protecting and defending. But it is absolutely not something that you should be capitalizing on as an opportunity to pay people less, and to make them more poor. It's just not right. And so, that's all I would add to that, is that it really is true that Howard is an exceptional place. And it really is true that can't be a reason why instructors and faculty at Howard should be paid less than at other institutions in the market.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well and powerfully put. And, I guess I wanted to kind of make it clear, because we are, kind of coming around the final turn here, and we have only kind of mentioned the looming strike. We're recording this on Tuesday, March 22nd. Bargaining is going on as we speak. The strike may be averted by the time this comes out. It may not be. And in which case, non-tenure-track faculty will be on the picket line tomorrow, Wednesday, March 23rd. But, one of the reasons that we've spent half an hour kind of talking about all this important stuff kind of leading up to the strike is that even if the strike is averted, right, as y'all mentioned, right, it's not even gonna kind of come close to addressing all of these problems. Hopefully it addresses more of them than not. But, we're talking about, a deep seated issue here that translates to, real pain and real exploitation and real anger and fear and resentment. And it impacts faculty. It impacts their lives, their families' lives. It impacts students. And, I guess this is the thing that we were always saying, whether we were, talking as a graduate student union at Michigan, shout out to GEO, or the lecturers or the adjuncts. It's just kind of like there's almost this big, white elephant in the room that it's just like, it doesn't have to be like this, right? It shouldn't be like this. Like, if you are an institution saying our purpose in the world is to offer, students from around the world a world-class education, then treat the people who are providing that education well, right? Like, if that's what the product that you're supplying to people, then why would you constantly be, underpaying, exploiting, overworking, underprotecting, under-resourcing the very people who make your university run, right? Not just faculty, but staff, administrative staff, janitorial staff, so on and so forth, right? We could go on all day about this, but that's why we've spent this mini cast that is about the strike talking about all the stuff that isn't the strike, right? Or that led to the strike. I just wanted to kind of clarify that for listeners, because whether or not the strike happens, everything that we're talking about here is going to be very, very relevant, regardless of what happens in the next 24 hours. But, with the time that I have left with y'all, I wanted to kind of zero in on that and ask if you could kind of give listeners, a view of what this past week has been like, what it will mean if a deal is not reached and the strike does happen, and what sorts of key issues are y'all kind of hammering home at the bargaining table, and what the response from the university has been. Although, again, if it's dragged out the contract negotiation for 3 years, I can guess, but I guess just to make sure listeners are up to speed on everything that's led us to this point.
So I'll try to tackle some of that, and then I'll let Sean jump in. Overall, I would say what I've seen since, Friday was really the first day that we had an actual proposal from the university administration. We've been, doing the dance of negotiating pretty much since then. And it's a weird yo-yo kind of interaction. If you've never been in a contract negotiation, it's a lot of back and forth. And there's not a real dialogue, right? It's like one side explains their proposal and provides their, evidence, defense, context, and the other side does their piece, and then we all go away and talk about it in our separate groups and come together and kind of do that over and over again. So like that's the practicality of what happens. I guess I'd like to kind of focus on the other stuff, right? So obviously we're in the middle of an interview. We've been doing lots of interviews. There's been a lot of, media attention to this. There have been a lot of communications from the university. And as we've gotten closer to the actual deadline for the strike, I have been increasingly disturbed by the miscommunications that have been coming from the university, and the behavior of the university itself. So, we just recently found out that students are essentially being bullied into not participating. They're asking full-time faculty to essentially sit in on all of our classes and take attendance. I don't take attendance in my class. I mean, it's the sort of tactics that we're seeing sort of at this last minute are really disappointing. And it signals to me a couple of things. One, that, this resistance to working together to find a fair and equitable contract, somebody is saying, we don't want to give them a single thing. And I just don't understand that attitude. Everything you do to improve workers' conditions makes for a better worker. Go to any school management. They know that. They tell you that. That's the whole, they get it. Like the science is clear. If your workers are happy and healthy and getting their needs met, they do better work for you. Why would you not want that? I mean, we know why, right? Because it's about bottom line and dollars and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's been really disappointing to see, sort of what's happening in this last minute. And yet I remain hopeful that we will come to a resolution. If not, at 9 a.m. tomorrow, we will be on strike. And, that means we will not be doing the business of the university for those 3 days. And we hope that the strength of our action will prove to the university that we are resolute, and that a fair and equitable contract will happen, regardless of their resistance.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway in the process and what we've seen the last 2 weeks is or the last really week is what has been is strikes work. I mean, it's all about power is really what it is. And I mean, we did see 180 in a lot of ways at the table. And you realize that actually there is money there to pay people better, because all of a sudden they're making economic proposals that are wildly different than the economic proposals they made in the past, which were nothing, which were exactly the same thing that we were being paid, except now we would pay union dues. That was their original proposal. And so all of a sudden you see actually there are resources, which of course we should know, because they don't plead budgetary concerns when they set the salary for the president, which is $1.7 million a year and higher than any university in the DC market. So there's money there. They have the resources. They just don't want to use them because they can get away with not using those resources. They can, and that's what they've said as much to us is we're willing to pay these low wages because, well, there's always someone around the corner willing to do the job. And no one's shackled to the university. They said this to us at the table. It was a pretty shocking thing to hear when you're talking about an HBCU founded right after the Civil War. But yeah, but strikes work. And we have seen something fundamentally different at the table. And I think that it's possible that we could settle. We're not there, but I think it's possible. But I think that tomorrow, if we do go on strike, I mean, there's overwhelming support from faculty. The chair of the Faculty Senate and the Faculty Council broadly voted unanimously to support our proposal. The other unions on the campus, we've been meeting with them. The nurses are engaged in a bargaining session right now too. But the other unions have come out and supported us. And there's tremendous support from the students. I mean, just to circle back to what we've been saying, the students at Howard really are exceptional. And one of the ways in which they are is they're just tapped into the university. They know what's happening and they're really engaged with organizing. And they're really, really good organizers. So I think this is part of the reason why I think the university wants and is trying to avoid the strike, because they know that it could be very impactful. So we'll see what happens. We're getting back to the table, at 6, and hopefully we do come to a settlement. I think it's what all of my colleagues, and I can definitely speak, just for me, it's what I would like to see happen. But strikes work. This is the biggest lesson I think I've learned from all this.
Yeah, no, you're not kidding. I mean, I think the last kind of episode that we did centered on academia was with the good folks in the Columbia University strike, right? And they held the line and they put up with a lot of shit, a lot of bullying from Columbia, and even shakeups within their own union, but they held fast and they stood together and they got support from the community, and it really was an incredible thing to see. So just yet another shout out to all the amazing student workers there at Columbia. We're sending love and solidarity to them, just like we're sending love and solidarity to all the non-tenure track faculty there at Howard. And yeah, like you just heard Sean say, in 30 minutes, they're going back to the bargaining table. So I'll just say to you both what we always say to folks who are heading to the bargaining table. From all of us here at Working People, give them hell, and we're with you. And so I guess on that note, I just wanted to ask really quick, then I'll let you go. For folks listening, again, we hope that the university comes to its senses. We hope that y'all get the contract that you deserve. It's not all going to happen in one go, but we hope that the university realizes that, it's folks like Sean and Aisha who help make Howard such a special place. And to keep being such a special place, it needs to stop messing around and pay people what they deserve, give them the protections and support that they deserve, so on and so forth. So we're all with you as you enter the bargaining table, head back into the bargaining room. But I wanted to ask, regardless of what happens, if you do go on strike, if you do reach an agreement tonight, what can folks listening in the U.S. and beyond do to show solidarity with you and your colleagues?
We would love for you to share support with us on social media. Follow us on Twitter at LecturersHU. Same handle for TikTok, same handle for Insta. Share, like, follow. Share your stories. If you've had similar experiences or, you've felt the pain of the bargaining table, keep the message spread. If you're in the DC area and you're up for a peaceful protest, you can join us on campus at 9 a.m. Read the stories, follow the media that's going out about what we're doing. We would so appreciate that.
And there's also, for those of you who are involved in unions on other campuses, Higher Ed Labor United has a petition that they organized to just express solidarity with the unit. It's a letter to the president and the provost. So maybe we can link to that. But we've had some big notable support. Kianga Yamada Taylor, I think, signed that letter today, and so sign the letter and send it around. We definitely need all the support that we can get.